Kevin thought firing me was just cleaning house. What he didn't realize was that I was the one who managed every contract, every recruiter, every single candidate pipeline feeding his company. The moment I walked out, their hiring machine died on the spot. Within days, positions went unfilled, projects stalled, and clients started asking dangerous questions. Before I continue my story, where are you watching from? Hit that like and subscribe button. You're about to see how arrogance can implode a company from the inside out. Trust me, you'll want to hear how this unfolds. Kevin Brooks didn't waste time dressing it up. No explanations, no warnings, no private conversation. He called me into the glass-walled conference room with two junior HR staff watching like extras in a courtroom drama and said flatly, "Jessica, your time here is over. Badge and laptop now." His voice carried that smug assurance of someone who thought firing me would prove his authority. I had given this company 8 years. 8 years of weekends spent sourcing candidates, running recruitment drives, negotiating contracts with agencies, and quietly filling gaps management didn't even know existed. And now, with a half smirk, he believed he could erase all of that with a single sentence. I didn't argue. I didn't plead. Instead, I slid my badge across the table, set my laptop on top of it, and placed my company phone neatly to the side like I was arranging a photo for evidence. For a brief moment, he looked almost disappointed that I didn't fight back. That was his first mistake. Walking out of that office, the air felt heavier, like the walls knew what he had just done. I had seen plenty of bad decisions in my career, but this one was special. Kevin thought he was making an example out of me, a message to the staff that no one was safe. What he actually did was cut the single thread holding their entire hiring system together. I didn't build technology like firewalls or encrypted logins. My power was simpler and more dangerous. I knew every recruiter in the city, every agency contract, every school pipeline that sent interns through our doors. And every single one of those connections ran through me. The juniors sitting in that room didn't see it. Kevin didn't see it. But as I walked down the hallway past rows of employees tapping away at their keyboards, I realized they were all about to feel it. Firing me wasn't just removing an employee. It was pulling the plug on the company's bloodstream. I stepped into the parking lot, the sun glaring off windshields, and sat in my car without starting the engine. 8 years, gone in a sentence. But I wasn't shaking. I wasn't crying. I was clear. Kevin thought he had ended something. What he had done was start the clock. And soon, every hiring manager, every department head, and eventually the board itself would discover what he'd actually fired that day. Not just Jessica Miller, but their entire future. For 8 years, I was the quiet backbone of their entire recruitment engine, the one who made sure their offices didn't sit half empty and their projects didn't stall for lack of people. It wasn't glamorous work, not the kind that wins awards or gets you quoted in press releases, but it was essential. When a new department needed 20 engineers in 3 months, I was the one who found them. When executives promised expansion into a new market, I lined up the talent to make it real. I was the bridge between the company and the labor force that kept it alive, and no one else knew how to walk it. Every recruiter contract came through me. Every pipeline from local universities, every staffing agency, every community job board. We had a presence because I put us there. If an agreement needed to be renewed, I handled it. If an agency started slipping, I cut them off and brought in someone better. The executives liked to pretend these things just happened in the background, as if resumes appeared out of thin air. They never saw the constant negotiations, the tracking, the juggling of schedules, the long nights spent making sure an offer letter went out before a competitor could steal the candidate. Kevin especially never understood it. He thought HR was about spreadsheets and compliance memos, the visible things he could hold in his hand. He didn't see the living network I had built around the company, A web of relationships that could either open doors or close them permanently. That was my leverage, even if I never framed it that way. I didn't brag about it because I believed, maybe naively, that loyalty was its own reward. But sitting in my car the day he fired me, I realized something crucial. I hadn't just been an employee. I had been the system itself. Without me, the contracts would expire. The recruiters would redirect candidates to other firms. The schools would give their brightest students to someone else. Kevin had no idea he had just unplugged the one person holding all of that together. And once the machine stopped, there was no switch he could flip to start it again. The moment I stepped out of that building, I knew exactly what to do. I didn't need to raise my voice, send threats, or storm into Kevin's office demanding recognition. My revenge would be quieter, cleaner, and far more devastating. Sitting at my kitchen table that evening, I opened my laptop and pulled up my personal list of contacts, the list I had built patiently over 8 years. Every recruiter, every agency, every school liaison. They weren't tied to the company, they were tied to me. My name was the one on the emails, my phone number saved in their contacts. Kevin might have thought he fired an employee, but what he really fired was the person who made sure his company had a future workforce. The first step was simple. I began canceling standing agreements. Not with a shout, but with a short, professional note. Please consider our contract concluded as of today. Thank you for your partnership. No threats, no explanation, just closure. Recruiters who relied on my calls to place candidates were suddenly cut off, and without me, there was no one left at the company who even knew which contracts were active. Next, I turned to the candidate listings. With a few clicks, postings came down. Open positions marked active went dark overnight. The company would wake up to a silent inbox, no resumes arriving, no fresh prospects waiting in their queue. Then I moved on to the long-term projects, the campus programs, the internship funnels, the community sponsorships that made sure young talent looked our way. I pulled back our involvement, rescinded speaking spots, told coordinators we would not be participating. To them, it wasn't shocking. After all, Jessica Miller had always been the one reaching out, the one who followed through. Without me, the company's presence simply evaporated. By the time I shut my laptop, I hadn't done anything illegal, hadn't broken a single rule. I had simply taken back what was mine, the relationships, the legwork, the pipeline I had nurtured while Kevin and his peers sat in meetings congratulating themselves. They would still show up to the office tomorrow, still assume resumes would roll in, still believe recruiters were working behind the scenes. But the truth was already in motion. The machine wasn't theirs. It had always been mine. And now, piece by piece, I was unhooking it, leaving nothing behind but silence. The first cracks showed faster than even I expected. Within days of my exit, managers were already calling Kevin's office asking why their scheduled interviews had evaporated. He brushed them off, telling them to be patient, that HR had it under control. But by the end of the week, entire calendars were empty. Recruiters who used to line up candidates went silent. Resumes that once arrived in steady streams stopped overnight. Kevin, in his arrogance, assumed it was a minor hiccup, a tech glitch, or maybe a missed email. He had no idea that the entire network had been shut off at its source. The silence was deafening, and it spread like wildfire. One department head sent a furious email after her top role, which had taken weeks to advertise, had 0 applicants. Another flagged that agencies they had worked with for years weren't even returning calls. The truth was simple. They weren't ignoring the company. They were ignoring Kevin, because I was no longer there to bridge the gap. By the second week, panic started to seep through the cracks of his polished image. Internal chatter grew loud. People began asking, quietly at first, then openly, why recruiting had gone dark. Teams needing new staff couldn't move forward. Projects were delayed because critical positions sat unfilled. The company had built its reputation on fast growth and quick scaling, but suddenly, that engine was sputtering in plain sight. What made it worse was how visible the failure became. Competitors started picking up the slack. Agencies that once prioritized my calls now pushed candidates directly to rival firms. Universities where we once had a front-row seat to career fairs gave prime slots to others. The company's name, once a reliable presence, now carried a question mark. Are they hiring? Do they still have programs? People whispered. The answer was written in the silence of their absence. Employees noticed too. Morale dipped as workloads piled up, with no reinforcements arriving. Instead of celebrating new hires, teams were stretched thin, doubling tasks just to keep afloat. Kevin tried to spin it as temporary, telling anyone who would listen that HR was modernizing processes, shifting to new strategies. But every excuse rang hollow when empty desks sat as daily reminders of failure. The most brutal moment came at a public industry event. Our competitors unveiled new recruitment campaigns, showcasing bright faces and fresh hires. Our company? Nothing. No banners, no announcements, no interns in branded t-shirts passing out materials. Just a ghost presence, like we'd ceased to exist in the talent market. People talked. And in business, once people start talking about your absence, it's already a kind of death. For me, the beauty of it was in its simplicity. I hadn't sabotaged a single file or touched their systems. I hadn't broken into anything or twisted the law. I simply stopped carrying the weight they didn't even realize was on my back. Kevin had taken my badge and laptop, thinking he'd stripped me of power. But as those empty desks multiplied, as deadlines slipped, and clients started noticing the strain, everyone saw the truth. The collapse wasn't sudden like a building falling. It was slower, like the lights dimming one by one until the whole place sat in darkness. And Kevin? He was left standing there, trying to explain why the company that once bragged about its growth now looked like it was withering from the inside. He thought firing me proved control. In reality, it proved just how little control he'd ever had. By the Monday after my exit, the fallout was impossible to ignore. What Kevin had assumed would be a routine reshuffle was already unraveling into chaos. The managers who used to rely on me for candidate updates were now staring at empty calendars, realizing the interviews they expected simply weren't coming. A week earlier, they had believed the company was thriving. Now they were watching their hiring pipeline dry up in real time. The first shock came in the form of missed interviews. Entire schedules that I had built by hand, carefully negotiated with recruiters and candidates, sat blank. People showed up ready to meet, but there was no one on the company's side to greet them because confirmations had never been sent. Those candidates walked away frustrated, and most never came back. By midweek, recruiters stopped picking up the phone altogether. It wasn't anger, it was indifference. Without me, the company wasn't a priority anymore. Agencies that once called me first had already begun redirecting their top talent elsewhere. Kevin, still clinging to his illusion of control, told department heads that the market was soft, that there was a nationwide hiring slowdown. But the lie didn't hold up for long. Everyone could see competitors filling roles effortlessly. Our desks stayed empty. Theirs filled up. The contrast was brutal. Inside the building, frustration boiled over. Project managers demanded replacements for staff who had quit months earlier. Department heads circulated memos warning of delayed launches and shrinking capacity. Employees whispered openly that leadership had broken the company's backbone by firing the one person who actually kept the system running. Morale collapsed as workloads doubled with no reinforcements in sight. Some employees quietly updated their resumes. Others didn't wait. They left outright, unwilling to stay in a company that looked more unstable by the day. The spiral accelerated. A major client called in, furious that a promised team still hadn't materialized. Another threatened to cancel a contract entirely. Kevin tried to hold emergency meetings, snapping at what remained of the HR staff, demanding they fix things. But the problem wasn't technical. It was relational. These recruiters, agencies, and institutions had worked with me, trusted me, answered when I called. To them, Kevin was just a nameplate with no credibility. He couldn't repair bonds he had never built. By Friday, the truth had settled like dust in every corner of the office. They weren't just facing delays, they were facing the collapse of their ability to hire at all. Kevin had turned a functioning pipeline into an empty shell, and there was no quick fix. What stung most for those left behind was the realization that this wasn't sabotage from the outside. It was the natural result of one arrogant decision made inside their own glass walls. 1 week in, the company that once bragged about growth and opportunity looked hollow, desperate, and broken. And Kevin, the man who wanted to make an example out of me, had unintentionally made himself the symbol of failure instead. By the 6-month mark, the company wasn't just limping, it was bleeding out in full view of everyone who had once admired its growth. The career page that had once shown dozens of listings now looked barren, with stale postings left to expire and no fresh opportunities to attract talent. The departments that had relied on steady recruitment streams were skeletal, some running at half capacity, others abandoning projects altogether because they simply didn't have the people to execute. Entire initiatives were shelved, not because the ideas weren't good, but because there was no one left to carry them forward. Clients started pulling away, one by one. The smaller contracts disappeared first, quiet cancellations that could be brushed off. But soon, the larger accounts, the ones that made up the backbone of the company's revenue, began shifting their work to competitors who could guarantee delivery. There were whispers in the industry that our firm couldn't staff teams anymore, that deadlines were nothing but empty promises. And in business, reputation dies faster than revenue. Kevin tried to fight the tide. He pushed for quick hires, throwing job ads online and demanding recruiters jump back in. But without me, without the years of trust I had built, his calls went unanswered. Agencies had already moved on. Universities gave speaking slots to other companies. Even local recruiters who once counted on me for regular business had written our firm off as unreliable. Kevin couldn't buy back credibility. He had thrown it out the day he threw me out. Inside the walls, the decay was visible. Employees carried workloads meant for 3 people. Burnout spread like a sickness. Resignations piled up on Kevin's desk, each one more proof that the company wasn't shrinking by choice. It was collapsing from within. The board noticed. Whispers about leadership failures turned into direct questions. How had one firing triggered this? Why hadn't Kevin anticipated the risk? The answers never came because Kevin never understood the truth. The system wasn't held together by policies or spreadsheets. It was held together by the relationships I had cultivated and the quiet consistency I had maintained. And once I was gone, nothing could replace that. By the end of the 6th month, the company's proud image had cracked beyond repair. Kevin's smirk, the one he wore when he thought firing me proved his authority, was gone. In its place was the hollow face of a man tied to a decision that would define his career as a cautionary tale. Looking back, I never had to break a single rule. I didn't sabotage files, didn't hack servers, didn't steal information. All I did was stop carrying the weight they had piled on me for years without recognition. For 8 years, I had been the silent bridge connecting them to every recruiter, every agency, every candidate pipeline, and they thought I could be replaced with a wave of Kevin's hand. That arrogance was their undoing. The beauty of it was how natural the collapse felt once I stepped away. Recruiters redirected their candidates elsewhere. Agencies cut ties. Universities handed their graduates to competitors. Nothing I did was malicious. It was simply the absence of care, the absence of the one person who made the system work. And when the machine broke, it broke in public, for everyone to see. Kevin's smirk the day he fired me has stayed in my memory, not because it hurt, but because it proved how blind leadership can be when they mistake titles for talent. He believed his authority was enough to erase me. Instead, it erased the company's ability to survive. I walked away lighter, free from the endless grind of fixing problems no one acknowledged. They were left drowning in the consequences of their own choice. If there's a lesson in this, it's simple. Never underestimate the unseen labor that holds an organization together. It isn't always written into contracts or carved into mission statements. Sometimes it lives in the dedication of one person who makes sure the wheels never stop turning. Take that person for granted, and one day, you'll realize too late that the collapse you're suffering isn't sabotage. It's the natural result of forgetting who kept you standing in the first place. The moment Kevin fired me, he thought he was taking away my dignity, but in reality, he was dismantling the very system that had kept his company alive. What he didn't realize was that sometimes the quietest person in the room is the one holding the entire foundation together. And when that foundation walks away, collapse isn't sabotage, it's justice unfolding in slow motion. For years, I had carried the invisible work no one noticed. Nurturing recruiter relationships, building trust with agencies, making sure departments had the people they needed. They dismissed that as background noise until the moment it was gone. That's the heart of this story. The truth that unseen labor is often the most valuable. In life, we often underestimate people because their contributions don't scream for attention. But real strength doesn't always show up in titles, corner offices, or flashy announcements. It shows up in consistency, in the everyday acts that quietly hold things together. What I learned is that respect must run deeper than lip service. Companies collapse when they forget that people are the lifeblood of every achievement. Leaders collapse when they mistake authority for competence. And individuals collapse when they give away their worth without boundaries. My revenge wasn't about destruction. It was about showing the natural cost of arrogance. I didn't torch bridges. I simply stopped carrying the weight of people who never bothered to notice it was on my back. The moral is clear. Never ignore or belittle the people who hold your world together, whether at work, in family, or in friendships. And if you're that person, the one doing the unseen labor, don't let others convince you that you're disposable. Walk away from those who can't see your value, and you'll discover that their collapse isn't your failure. It's their truth catching up. How to get started today. Write down one way you add invisible value at work or home. Communicate that clearly to someone who benefits from it. Set one boundary this week that protects your worth. If this story resonated with you, I'd love to hear your thoughts. Comment below, share your own experiences, and don't forget to subscribe for more stories like this.